Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters, where extraordinary stories from beyond our skies come to life. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Get comfortable and settle in. I've spent years flying, knowing every inch of my little Cessna 172 and logging countless flights over the Kansas landscape. Late September brought an evening that would change everything. Cruising at about 500 feet just outside Wichita, the recently set sun cast a soft glow over farmland and cornfields stretching beneath me. Routine quickly vanished when a flash of metallic brightness caught my eye. At first I thought it might be another aircraft or drone, but something felt different. The object was unlike anything I'd seen before, almost disc-like, but more angular. A flattened diamond with smooth edges hanging impossibly in the sky. No blinking lights, no sound. Then it moved. Not a gentle drift, but a razor-sharp 90 to turn without visible acceleration. As a pilot, I understand physics. An object that size shouldn't maneuver like this without tearing itself apart. Yet somehow it did. I froze for seconds before instinct took over. I adjusted my heading to track this strange object. But when I crested the tree ridge, it had vanished. No trail, no noise, just empty sky. My instruments showed nothing unusual. The radio remained silent. My heart raced as I tried processing what I'd witnessed. I touched down at my home airstrip with shaking hands, knowing this flight was extraordinary. After shutting down the engine around 8 p.m., two men appeared beside my truck. Their black uniforms resembled military or government agents, but no badges or insignia were visible. They stood serious and silent as I climbed down. I tried breaking the silence. "Can I help you?" One man stepped forward and asked without introduction, "Do you believe in physics or just experience?" Confused, I responded, "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, the other man pulled out a small black box with a screen and buttons. I glanced nervously at the runway, then back at them. Something about their calm demeanor made me uneasy. "I saw something strange up here," I said quietly. Moved in a way Had didn't make sense. The man with he device looked up and nodded. "We know," he said. The second man spoke. "Things like Had done you happen by accident. You've seen something you shouldn't have." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stuck in my throat. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. They didn't respond. Then he first man asked, "Did I seem aware of you watching?" I hesitated, unsure if I was just projecting fear. "I don't know." I didn't make a sound or blink lights busted way. I only felt deliberate. They exchanged a meaningful glance. Just like Hey walked away and drove off in a black SUV with no license plates. I watched he dusted behind hair Ares, my mind racing. Over he next few days, nothing happened. I told only Lisa about he encounter, leaving out most details. The story sounded crazy when spoken aloud. But his strange part didn't end here. Every time I flew over her same patch of farmland, I felt watched. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something reflective her. He, Reen boy, always vanished when I read closer. On a late flight home, my radio started crackling with static bursts on a clear frequency. No words, just a low buzzing noise. How lasted about 30 seconds before carrying or completely no. I was at Weenie Field late September working on a project about nocturnal animal behavior in forests near Ashland, Oregon. As a wildlife biologist, my focus this season was racking owl and bear movements. I'd see up a small railer on the edge of a clearing where we agged some animals, and I spend most nights here watching and recording. One night around 11 p.m., I stepped outside he railer to check some motion sensors near Reen. I was a cool night. He kinda smells like pine needles and damp earth. The air was still with no wind and no rustling in he leaves except for he usual nice sounds. As I scanned he treetops with a flashlight, I noticed something odd. A faint glow 100 F up. At first, I half thought it was a drone or a small helicopter, but here was no sound, no buzz, no rotor noise, nothing. Just his quiet, steady light. I wasn't moving like a drone would either. I hovered in place giant parade, and his light was diffuse. Kind of a pale white with a slight bluish tint. I stared for a minute, trying to convince myself I was some kind of aircraft I didn't. Until hen. "Keep your experience to yourself," the first man stated coldly. For years, I'd been flying these routes, and this time everything felt wrong. The silence struck me first. In my experience with wildlife and planes, there's always some background noise, but not this time. My phone wouldn't cooperate when I tried to take a picture. The camera seemed confused, with light interfering in ways I couldn't explain. Meanwhile, my flying instruments were functioning normally, but my handheld GPS kept losing signal in a specific area. I checked the plane repeatedly, no damage, no obvious interference. Lisa noticed changes in me too. When I returned from flights, she said I looked tense, as if carrying an invisible weight. A few weeks later, I spoke with Mr. Bear Cable Jenkins, an old crop duster pilot. I shared my experiences, expecting skepticism. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "You're not alone. Strange things happen here, but nobody talks about it." His words provided some comfort. I continued flying but avoided that particular airspace. The mysterious men never contacted me again, yet sometimes, during sunset flights, I catch a glimpse, that impossible turn, that strange gleam, and wonder what they were watching. My research took unexpected turns. Initially, I noticed blurry lights on my screens, almost like electronic interference. Then came the strangest moment. I seemed to vanish. One instant I was present, the next I wasn't. I meticulously checked my setup, motion sensors, cameras, hoping to capture something. The footage showed nothing unusual. The forest appeared completely normal, with typical owl calls and bat movements. About a week later, 2 men arrived at my research trailer just after sunset. While organizing samples, I heard an unexpected knock. Opening the door, I found 2 men in dark suits and black coats. They weren't typical officials. No standard badges or uniforms, just laminated ID cards hanging from chains. When they introduced themselves as Agent Blake and Agent Crane, claiming to represent a federal agency, their names meant nothing to me. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, and I live in Portland, but I spend a lot of time exploring the more remote parts of Oregon. Late October brought cold and damp weather as I hiked near an old, mostly forgotten Cold War radar station in the Cascades. The site was a landscape of remnants, concrete foundation slabs, rusted antenna pieces, the rest long gone. My research had been unusual lately. Wildlife agents had visited me, asking probing questions about local animal migration and recent anomalies. I'd been cautious in my responses, noting that everything seemed normal. Agent Crane and Blake reviewed my reports, requesting to examine my raw data files. After they left, I discovered something unsettling. The folder they'd sealed contained my reports, but with subtly altered numbers and observations. Movement patterns looked more consistent, with certain details mysteriously omitted. When I tried to verify their agency, the phone numbers were non-functional, and no one seemed to know anything about these men. Strange developments continued. The animals I'd been tracking began behaving unusually. One morning I found a dozen bird carcasses beneath a roost, a disturbing discovery that heightened my sense of unease. That evening, as I set up camp just past the tree line around 7 p.m., a low, deep hum started. It wasn't like any engine or animal sound I recognized. Constant and strange, it seemed to vibrate through the ground and air simultaneously. The bats stopped emerging entirely. When I tried reporting this to the local wildlife center, they claimed no similar reports existed. At night, walking near the tree line, I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving just out of sight. I couldn't discern if they were animals or something else entirely. My attempts to document these occurrences had drawn unexpected attention. The Wildlife Compliance Office's visit and the modified report suggested something more complex was happening, a puzzle I was struggling to understand. Here's the rewritten text. Something felt off that night in the forest. I'd noticed strange occurrences building up over the past few days. My technology started malfunctioning, phone calls filled with static, camera interference, and my laptop suddenly dying without explanation. The day after those 2 men visited, my work became increasingly difficult. Every time I tried to make progress, data would vanish, notes disappeared from my files, and I couldn't understand why. Though the men never returned, traces of their presence lingered, a mysterious folder, hushed mentions of a wildlife research compliance check that seemed to exist only in whispers. I moved my trailer and stopped fieldwork. The forest felt different, subtly altered in a way I couldn't quite describe. I'd still venture out, occasionally scanning the trees, not expecting anything unusual, just normal night sounds. An owl. Quiet. But that night was different. A low, unchanging hum drew my attention. Something was moving just beyond the tree line. Grabbing my flashlight, I approached the edge carefully. That's when I saw them, small, pale bluish orbs gliding silently through the shadows. They weren't like flashlights or lanterns, not people, not animals. Something else entirely. I backed away slowly, phone ready but silent, trying to rationalize what I'd seen, maybe a research team, a strange drone, but nothing explained those lights. That night, I slept fitfully, waking repeatedly to check the sounds. The next day, I hiked the trail, searching for any sign of activity. The forest seemed normal, just leaves rustling, distant bird calls, nothing unusual. Back at my rented cabin, I sat outside watching stars in the clear, cold night. Suddenly, headlights caught my eye. A black sedan moving down the nearby road. At first, unremarkable. But then I realized the headlights were off. Completely dark. I blinked, certain I must be mistaken. But no. The car was definitely there, moving silently through the darkness. I left just after dinner around 7 p.m., trying to get ahead of the fog that typically rolls in around midnight during this season. About halfway through the trip near Forge Mountain, my GPS suggested an unusual detour. I ended up near an old cabin off a remote forest road. As night fell, something felt off. For the next 2 nights, the same pattern repeated. Exactly every hour, a black car would drive past without headlights. I tried to flag it down the first time, flashing my flashlight, but it didn't react. No brake lights, no signals, just that steady, unnerving drive. The whole thing felt like a scene from a movie. I checked for power line issues or local outages, but everything else had lights. A black car drove by occasionally, and I heard a faint hum outside that seemed to vibrate through the walls and floor. The local person I'd spoken to earlier had been cryptic. "Some folks keep an eye on this place," he'd said with a shrug. "You never know." I didn't press for more information, but the sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing hour. After the 3rd night, I mentioned the car to a local at a diner. He gave me a weird look and asked if I was sure it wasn't just a truck. The drive usually takes about 3 hours, depending on how much you want to explore the back roads. Driving in darkness, I passed my cabin slowly, maintaining a steady pace, never speeding up or slowing down. The next day, I hiked back to explore a nearby radar site. The forest felt dense, the air thick with an unexplained tension. Some old concrete slabs looked freshly cracked, as if something heavy had recently pressed down on them. I took pictures, unsure what to make of it. That night, just after midnight, the situation escalated. The black car stopped across the street, engine off, no lights on. A figure in dark clothes stepped out, stood perfectly still for a minute, then returned to the car and drove away without headlights. I packed up early the next morning, telling myself it was probably just a local prank or some kind of surveillance. But the memories lingered, the mysterious hum, the lights beneath the trees, the silent car. Weeks have passed and I still can't fully explain what happened. Late at night, sometimes I think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I haven't returned to the area since. I don't know who was driving the car or what was really going on, but I know what I experienced was real, even if I can't quite understand it. Driving down a quiet rural road in Arkansas, lined with pine trees and utility poles. Late September, and I was hoping to save a few minutes by bypassing a construction zone near Rolala. Just another routine trip, or so I thought. Suddenly, something caught my attention. An old red and white striped radio tower stood just beyond the tree line, its beacon blinking. Arkansas has hundreds of these scattered around, so initially nothing seemed unusual. But something felt different. An unnatural silence hung in the air, no bugs, no tree frogs, which was odd for the season. My car began behaving strangely. The engine didn't exactly stall, but softened, with RPMs dropping low, despite my pressing the gas. Headlights dimmed and dashboard lights flickered briefly. That's when I noticed the tower's beacon had stopped blinking, replaced by a steady, solid red glow. And then I saw it. Hovering above the tower, about 50 feet higher and slightly off to one side, was a huge dark shape, like an overturned dinner plate. No lights, no reflection, just hanging perfectly still. I slowed to a crawl, partially off the road. The radio was already off, but the screen showed only static and blank numbers. Without warning, the engine cut completely. No sputtering, just dead silence. I sat there, key turned, foot on the brake, completely uncertain. The cabin light turned on by itself. The AC blew hot for a moment, despite being set to cool. My hands were shaking, though I didn't feel cold. It was as if my senses were lagging, disconnected from reality. When I tried to restart the car, nothing, not even a click. Looking back, I saw the red light was gone. The object remained dark against the sky, a little wider than the tower's platform, and about half as tall. No sound, which was impossible given how close it was. Then it moved, not rotating or tilting, but sliding smoothly sideways about 20 feet, then sinking behind the trees like it was effortlessly descending into the forest. No bouncing, no jerking, just controlled, fluid movement. The next morning, while cleaning pine needles off my windshield, a black sedan pulled up across the street. An unremarkable Crown Victoria with tinted windows and a small antenna. A man in a suit and tie stepped out, white, maybe mid-50s, with no badge or clipboard. He walked up the driveway deliberately, like someone accustomed to going where he wanted. Stopping 6 feet from me, he smiled. The night before had been strange. As if gravity didn't apply, I disappeared momentarily. The red beacon blinked once. The radio suddenly came back to life, cutting in mid-song like someone had unpaused it. The headlights brightened. I turned the key and the engine started immediately with no issues. I didn't stick around, I floored it. The car fishtailed slightly on the shoulder before speeding back onto the main road. My hands didn't stop shaking until I hit Donnell. I got home late around 12:30 a.m. I told no one, not my boss, not my roommate, not my parents. I didn't even write it down. I kept telling myself I was just tired, that the car had a simple hiccup, that the thing in the sky was a trick of light. Then he arrived. He nodded back automatically. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I'm here to follow up on your vehicle malfunction," he said. "Last night, approximately 9:42 p.m. Highway 314 near the FN Tower west of Hollis, my stomach dropped. I couldn't speak. The paper looked like a waiver. VI Pay Malfunction Liabilities Release was printed in bold capital letters. Underneath was a paragraph of dense legal language about acknowledging no damage and confirming I hadn't filed a complaint. My name was already printed next to a blank signing line, "How did you know?" I started to ask. He just smiled. Not friendly, just flat. No repairs necessary. Correct. I nodded, not reaching for the paper. He tapped it once with his finger, a gesture that seemed to urge me to sign. I didn't. He held the paper out for a few seconds, then folded it back up and returned it to his coat. "Thank you for your time," he said, then walked back to his car and drove off. There was no visible license plate, or if there was, the numbers weren't recognizable. Later, I looked for tire marks. Nothing. No sign he'd ever been here. The car has been fine ever since. I'm Evan, 31, working part-time at a hardware store in Santa Rosa. Surfing is my escape, the one thing that calms my brain since moving here from inland. I've been hitting this spot near Bodega Bay for weeks, usually arriving before sunrise to beat the crowds. That morning was different. Around 4:45 a.m., I parked at Devil's Spine, a narrow cliff stretch where waves typically break cleanly before the wind kicks up. Something felt off immediately. The air carried a strange metallic scent, and the tide moved unnaturally slow. Foam barely touched the usual rock markers as I prepared to head down the steep path. As I was surfing along the narrow rail, something strange happened with the sky. At first, I thought it was fog, but this was completely different. The stars above the water simply disappeared, not dimmed or obscured, but completely gone. Oddly, the sky behind me toward land remained crystal clear, with Orion and the constellations still visible. I crouched near a twisted pine and rested my board against my knees, staring upward. The blank space looked wrong, almost like someone had cut a chunk out of the atmosphere. An absolute silence surrounded me. No gulls, no wind, no wave sounds. Just an eerie pressure in my ears. The water had transformed into a flat, glassy surface, similar to what happens during rapid altitude changes. In my 3 years of surfing this beach, I'd never seen anything like it. Not during calm days, not even during red tides. Something was definitely not right. I still drive this route sometimes for work. The radio works, but I never take that detour anymore. I've never seen that shape again, and I'm not looking to start. Nothing felt off as I stood by the surf path. Nothing moved, nothing approached, but a heavy weight pressed against my chest, urging me to leave. I quickly grabbed my board and hurried back to my van, an unremarkable silver 06 Dodge with sandy carpets and a busted sliding door that I never bother locking, used solely for early morning surf runs. When I reached the van after cresting the hill, everything appeared normal. No lights, no people around, though shaken. I decided to call my buddy Darren from Salmon Creek to see if he'd noticed anything strange. But as I yanked open the driver's door and climbed in, I froze. A man was sitting in the back seat, completely motionless, facing forward, hands flat on his knees, wearing a black suit and shirt. His skin was pale as paper, existing in some indeterminate middle space, no discernible age, no hair, no glasses, no jewelry. I couldn't speak, just stared through the rearview mirror, breathing hard. Then he spoke, his voice flat and hollow, as if emptiness itself was talking. "Does the ocean ever show you things?" He slightly turned his head toward me, just enough to indicate awareness. "You're here often. Stay long enough, it shows you more." When I managed to ask what, he said nothing more, simply returning his gaze forward. I remained frozen, keys in hand, surfboard wedged against the passenger seat. When I turned to face him directly, he vanished. No sound, no movement, no disturbance to the gravel or surrounding grass. Gone as if he'd never been there. The night was cold and clear, a typical Tuesday in March. Around 11:45 p.m. I was driving south on US 395 from my sister's place in Carson City back to Bishop, California. The road stretched quietly between black hills and desert scrub, with my headlights cutting through the darkness about 20 miles north of Bridgeport. Something caught my eye, a soft yellowish glow about the size of a bus. At first, I thought it might be a flare or low-flying plane. It drifted slowly above the western ridgeline, not flickering or moving fast. Instead, it seemed to pulse gently as it floated sideways before dropping behind the hill and vanishing without a sound. I eased off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder, wondering if it could have been a crash or weather balloon. Suddenly, headlights appeared in my rear-view mirror. They started far back but closed the gap quickly. A plain black SUV with deep tint and unusual government plates pulled up behind me about 15 feet back. No one got out. The engine remained running, but the headlights went dark. I could hear it idling surprisingly quietly for its size. I thought maybe they were highway patrol or BLM checking on me, but no one approached my window. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. For 10 or 15 minutes I sat on the hood, fighting panic. I wasn't tired, hadn't been drinking, hadn't hit my head. Everything felt brutally real. Eventually, I returned to the van, checking the rearview mirror, now empty, containing only my crusty towel and a bag of fins. I drove home late that night, pulling into my 2-bedroom rental outside town. Nothing special, just a small place with a fenced-in yard and a cracked driveway, backing up to a dry creek bed. 2 weeks later, I returned to the beach. Everything looked normal. The water was choppy. Birds were back, but something felt off. The rails smelled faintly of copper, and I could have sworn the waves were breaking about 10 feet further out than before. I haven't surfed there since June. I still remember the SUV that pulled up beside me on the highway. I tried to catch a glimpse of the driver, but the tinted windows and angle made it impossible. Just a dark blob where someone should have been. We sat even with each other for about 20 seconds, the engine idling. Then it drove off. Something strange happened one evening in early October, around 9:30 p.m., while I was working as an air traffic controller at a small regional airport in northern Idaho. It wasn't a glamorous job, mostly small private planes and occasional cargo flights at a quiet place that saw only a handful of aircraft each day. The tower was old, barely updated, and I was usually the only controller on duty. I actually enjoyed the solitude. It let me zone out, focusing on radio chatter and my screens. That night, the weather was clear and chilly, a crisp fall night with the moon overhead. Suddenly, something caught my eye on the radar. Way above the usual flight paths, a massive object was sitting motionless over the western mountain range. At first, I thought it was a system glitch. I reset the radar, checked the power supply, and even restarted everything. The DOT remained exactly where it was. I ran through all the standard checks. I reviewed the flight schedule and transponder list. I called the FAA regional office to ask about any unusual traffic. Nothing came up. No reported flights, no military exercises, no helicopters, no drones. This thing was massive compared to other radar blips, but it made no radio calls and showed no movement. Later that night, back at home, everything felt normal. I turned on the kitchen light, fed the cat, and poured a glass of water. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, still buzzing from the weird encounter. Maybe 20 minutes passed, then came the knock. 3 quick taps. Not loud, not the doorbell, just knuckles on glass. I froze, wondering if I'd imagined it. But it came again. Same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. No car in the driveway, no movement on the street. I flipped on the porch light and opened the door. Nothing but a taped envelope on the glass. Right at eye level was a black envelope. Matte finish, square corners, no markings, just a piece of black tape holding it in place. I stood there for a long time before removing the tape. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, like an expensive wedding invitation, blank, except for a short line of printed text in the center. Not everything drifts down. I checked the street again. Quiet. Even the porch light seemed dim. I stayed up the rest of the night, not calling anyone. What would I say? I kept the envelope tucked away in the drawer next to my bed. I never showed it to anyone, and I never tossed it out. I logged an unidentified stationary radar contact and sent the information up the chain of command, thinking someone might investigate. Around 11 p.m., the power flickered briefly, but the system stayed operational. Before midnight, the contact mysteriously vanished. The next day felt normal, but something was off. When I phoned my supervisor, she sounded distracted and annoyed. She questioned my report and claimed the radar data showed nothing unusual in that sector. My front camera now sends motion-activated clips to my phone when someone's near the porch. The last alert was at 8:17 p.m., hours before I go home. After that, just silence until sunrise. I don't drive that route unless absolutely necessary. One afternoon, an unrecognizable voice called from a federal aviation agency saying they would visit the tower for a routine check. Around 7 p.m., 3 men arrived at the airport entrance. They wore identical black coats and button-up shirts. Without ties, appeared to be in their late 40s or early 50s, with short graying hair and faces that seemed almost rehearsed in their friendliness. Their badges looked official, but didn't match any agencies I recognized. When I asked about their agency, they gave vague responses about special aviation oversight. They requested the previous night's radar logs and recordings, which I provided, screen prints, notes, and system recordings. They quietly skimmed through the materials, exchanging brief, low comments I couldn't understand. One looked up and remarked about my writing style in a polite tone that felt subtly threatening. They asked to calibrate some equipment and wanted access to the radar console for about 20 minutes. I agreed and went to the break room for a drink. When I returned, they had vanished without a trace. No goodbye, no note. The door was locked from the inside, so they must have left through the main entrance. That's when I noticed the tower logbook was missing. The thick binder containing flight plans, radio calls, and my report about the strange radar contact. Calls to my supervisor and the FAA revealed no authorization for these visitors. Security cameras at the entrance were inexplicably offline that evening, supposedly for maintenance I hadn't been informed about. Over the next few days, I tried to investigate. Now I've been with the National Weather Service for about 5 years now, mostly doing remote monitoring and radar operations from small outposts. This particular station sits on a ridge about 10 miles east of the mountain range itself. Pre-isolated with the closest town over an hour away, the kind of place where if something weird happens, you're the only one around to see it. That night in late April around 10 p.m, I was running my usual Doppler radar scan. The job is mostly routine, checking for precipitation and wind palms. A few hours earlier, I'd noticed something strange on the screen. There was this huge stationary mass hovering over the northern part of the Strait Range, At first I figured it had to be a glitch or some sort of interference, but I kept watching. It wasn't moving, and it wasn't weather. No rain, no snow, just a dense, well-defined shape sitting there. I couldn't tell if it was a cloud or something else. I tried adjusting the frequency and recalibrating the radar, but the shape stayed consistent, sharp-edged, unlike any formation I'd ever seen. I've tracked everything from thunderstorms to dust devils in my time. It covered an area at least 5 miles across, too big to be a plane or bird flock, and it wasn't on any satellite images. Around midnight, the station's old landline phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Calls this late were usually from dispatch or maintenance, but something about the ringing made me pick up. A man's voice came through low and calm. "We need to come by your station. It's regarding the equipment." I asked who was calling, but the line went dead before he answered. No caller ID, no trace. I wondered if they were some kind of government inspectors, or maybe something else entirely. I stayed at the airport a little longer after my shift ended that week, waiting to see if anyone else showed up. No one did. The only unusual thing I discovered was a faint smell of ozone or burning wires near the radar console. Those men and their strange badges kept replaying in my mind, their odd comments lingering like an unresolved mystery. My supervisor avoided discussing the incident, treating it like a mistake I'd imagined. The log showed no record of the contact. Eventually, I left the job. The whole experience left me uneasy, like someone had quietly rewritten the facts of what I'd witnessed. The late summer had brought me to the trails, seeking solitude. After the Labor Day rush, I'd hiked these mountains near Poughkeepsie countless times, but this trip would be different. Living just 3 hours south, I knew the terrain well, yet something unexpected was waiting. Around 1:30 a.m. at the station, an unusual knock disrupted the night's silence. Against all protocol, 2 men stood outside, nearly identical, tall, mid-40s, wearing immaculate black coats with slicked back hair and unreadable expressions. When I hesitantly opened the door, one spoke flatly, "We're here to calibrate your radar." An unfamiliar badge with an official-looking seal convinced me to let them enter. Their movements were swift and precise, typing sequences I didn't recognize and adjusting frequencies that seemed unusual. 20 minutes of silent work followed. They packed up, nodded, and vanished as quickly as they'd arrived. After locking the door, I reviewed the radar and sensed something was different. The massive stationary object that had been present was now gone. System logs revealed something impossible. The past 8 hours had completely disappeared. Not deleted, simply vanished. Backup drives were empty. Dispatch had no records. My supervisor seemed confused, insisting no unauthorized entry had occurred and no security footage showed any visitors. Later that day, I sought clarity at a local diner, mentioning the missing logs to a few locals. No one reported anything unusual in the sky or mountains. The mysterious shape never reappeared on the radar. Walking back to the trailhead felt increasingly strange. Phantom footsteps seemed to follow me, just out of sync with my own movements. I'd stop periodically, scanning the surroundings and convincing myself it was just nerves or wildlife. But something felt fundamentally wrong. In moments of quiet reflection, I'd recalled that night, the unexplained visitors, the missing time, the sense that something significant had occurred just beyond my understanding. I was on one of my typical wilderness trips. 2 nights of camping, packing light, getting off the grid. The solitude is what I love. Around 6:30 a.m., I parked my white Outback at a railhead near Indian Lake. Vermont plates, but no sign of anyone else. I planned a 6-hour loop hike through terrain that felt perfect, cool, low 60s, clear skies. The first few hours were standard wilderness fare. Deer wandering, woodpeckers tapping, familiar forest sounds. I stopped for lunch at a small ridge overlooking a dense northern tree patch. Around 1:30 p.m., I packed up and continued walking. About 2/3 through the loop, something unusual happened. 3 red lights, maybe the size of a dime at arm's length. They flickered just above the tree line to my left, not quite in the sky, but hovering over the valley trees. Their blinking was rhythmic yet unfamiliar. I stopped and watched. No sound, no movement in the truck. Just these lights approximately 100 yards out. I started recording on my phone. They remained still, blinking. When I zoomed in, the camera struggled to focus through the trees. I lowered the phone, trying to squint directly at them, When I looked back at the screen, they were gone. I stood there for another 5 minutes, attempting to catch them again. Nothing. Late at night, I still scanned the skies toward the San Cristo Range. The radar never shows anything similar. But occasionally, when the wind is calm and the air feels thick, I swear I hear that low hum, as if the station itself is remembering. My equipment worked fine, except for the missing logs. Driving south with the sun still hanging in the sky, I planned to make it home before dark. Around Shrews Lake, a black car appeared in my rearview mirror. I couldn't identify the model, maybe a Dodge or Lincoln. Deeply tinted. Windows blocked any interior view. Initially I thought nothing of it. The car wasn't tailgating, just maintaining my pace. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down, it did the same. After 30 minutes and 2 exits where I expected it to turn off, the car remained behind me. No license plates, just a blank surface. I tried getting a better look by switching lanes and even took a random exit near Ticonderoga to see if it would follow. It did. The sky grew darker. I pulled into a small rest stop with a trash can and picnic table. I parked and killed the engine. The black car pulled in a few spots away. No one got out. I waited, watching the mirror, my heart racing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I pulled back onto the highway after starting the car, and a black vehicle was trailing me. Hours passed, and I drove beyond Albany, my thoughts drifting to the need for fuel. The gas needle was hovering near empty, so I took an exit near a Sunoco station just off Route 9 by Kinderhook. Darkness had completely settled in. While filling up, I noticed the black car parking at the far end of the lot. It remained without license plates, simply sitting there. I went inside the station and paid with cash, strategically positioning myself to keep an eye on the car through the windows. Upon returning, I found them parked right next to my vehicle. The driver's side window was down. A man around late 40s, clean-shaven and wearing a plain black ball cap and zip-up hoodie, sat expressionless. He held out a small black USB stick and said, "Replace your footage with this." When I didn't respond, he repeated the instruction louder. Almost mechanically, I took the stick. He rolled up his window, reversed out, and drove away, leaving me standing stunned. I held the USB for a long time before getting back in the car. The remainder of the drive home was uneventful. No black car, no followers, just me trying to comprehend what had just occurred. That night, sleep evaded me. The next morning, I plugged the new USB into an old, unused laptop that had been sitting empty for years. A single file labeled VM, 10 minutes long, was the only content. Upon opening it, I found nothing but static, not the typical visual white noise, but a grey screen with faint crackling and an intermittent, high-pitched tone reminiscent of an old CRT TV powering up. My buddy Greg and I weren't seeking anything unusual. We were simply at his uncle's hunting cabin for the weekend, located in northern Minnesota. The place was about a 40-minute drive from any town, nestled between a frozen lake and long, unplowed logging roads. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no neighbors, just a wood stove and firewood for company. We arrived Friday evening after dark. It was February, probably around 12 degrees, but the sky was clear and densely packed with stars. We'd brought food, beer, and snowshoes, planning to stay 2 nights and do some hiking, maybe ice fishing if we could unearth the gear. Saturday morning was leisurely, coffee and eggs, then heading out around 11 o'clock. A narrow trail cuts east from the property's back, winding through dense birch and pine stands, passing a collapsed shed, and eventually climbing a ridge. Greg mentioned an old fire tower used to stand at the top, though he hadn't been here in about a decade. We set out with snowshoes strapped to our boots, a thermos and granola bars in hand. The snow was deep but packed enough in spots that you didn't sink too much. The trek to the ridge's top took about 2 hours, not steep, just a steady climb. We hardly spoke during the ascent. The quiet was overwhelming. Our own footsteps sounded loud, and even the trees remained silent. Weeks later, I'd returned to a strange encounter at that location. I drove back to Indian Lake, not to hike, but to check something out. The white Outback was gone, replaced by another black car with a similar plate situation. I didn't stop, just kept driving. On that winter hike, we paused near an old fire tower, wooden steps mostly rotted. but the frame still standing about 40 feet tall. A faded "no trespassing" sign hung loosely. Crows drifted overhead as the winter light cast a strange bluish glow. The sun was already low despite it being only 3:30 in the afternoon. That's when Greg spotted something unusual beyond the tree line. Floating about 30 or 40 feet above ground was a soft white orb, roughly the size of a basketball. It didn't move, just hovered completely still. At first, we said nothing. I initially thought it might be sunlight hitting ice, but it was too high and too far away. Greg whispered, "That's not right." The strangest part was the absolute silence. Up that high, you'd expect wind or bird sounds, but there was nothing. When I tried to take a picture, my phone screen went glitchy with static bands. Then the orb moved slightly, not quickly, just a few feet higher and to the right. Still completely smooth and silent. Moments later it simply blinked out, not like it flew away, but just vanished. We started walking back faster, neither admitting how unsettled we were. The woods felt wrong, like something was watching us, matching our pace, just out of sight. When we reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. We didn't even remove our boots, just sat in silence before pouring whiskey. Later that night, after drinking, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it a drone, a flare, some weather phenomenon? I never shared the footage I took, didn't delete it either. But when I went back to check, the video wouldn't load, just a corrupt file message. I tried copying it, renaming it, using print software. Nothing worked. The thumbnail was just black. And Greg and I were staying at his uncle's remote cabin, trying to settle some nerves. We decided to head into town early one morning, about a 30-minute drive away. The local store was a strange mix: jerky, propane, and handmade crafts. We grabbed some snacks, filled up the truck's tank, and tried making small talk. Back at the cabin, everything changed. Greg's truck was parked exactly where we left it, but a man was sitting in the passenger seat. He looked completely out of place. Mid-50s, clean-shaven, wearing a black suit and coat. He seemed like a banker or lawyer, except he was sitting in this isolated parking area. We stopped walking, frozen. The man slowly opened the door, stepped out and smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, too long, like someone practicing how a smile should look. His voice was unnervingly soft and clear, almost as if speaking directly into our minds. "That wasn't meant for you," he said. When Greg asked who he was, the man just kept smiling. Then he shut the truck door and walked straight into the woods. No coat, no gloves, no hat, as if the cold meant nothing to him. We didn't move, just stood there. After about half a minute, Greg checked the truck. Everything looked untouched, but the interior was warm, as if the heat had been running. Yet the keys had been in Greg's pocket the whole time. We stayed one more night. No fire, doors locked, blinds shut. I didn't even take off my boots. Early the next morning we left. We haven't been back since. Greg's uncle keeps saying we're welcome any time, but we always make excuses. I've never really told anyone about what happened. What would I even say? That we saw a man in a suit who walked into the snow like it was nothing. That I still can't explain how he got into the truck. It was around 12:40 a.m. when I was driving home from my second shift at a packaging plant near Greensburg, Indiana. The roads were empty, typical for that stretch of CR7. 00E. Miles of corn and soy fields, occasional mailboxes at the end of gravel drives, no streetlights. I was almost home, finishing the last of my gas station coffee when the radio started cutting out. No static, just silence. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear what seemed like crunching snow outside. I'd sit up, listen, hear nothing. I didn't wake Greg, who was already tossing restlessly. My radio started acting weird, with sounds dropping out for a few seconds before popping back in mid-conversation. Initially, I thought it was just my station, but after switching channels, I realized everyone was experiencing the same issue. Then my headlights dimmed, not completely, but down to about half brightness for a few moments before returning to normal. Something caught my attention just off the left side of the road, about a quarter mile ahead. An old half-collapsed barn with a rusted roof, a landmark I'd passed countless times, sat near a cut field. Hovering above was an object, low in the sky, maybe 50 feet off the ground or less. It was big. At first, It appeared as a dark mass blocking out the stars. No lights, no sound, just a black void hanging in the sky. As I got closer, the shape became clearer. A triangle like a long, flat wedge with soft, rounded corners. It was massive, stretching almost across the entire field. The object wasn't completely stationary, but drifting slowly, balanced in the air with a smooth, deliberate movement, similar to a blimp. 3 small, dull red lights marked the underside, positioned near each point. They weren't blinking or glowing, just present, like standby LEDs on electronic devices. I pulled over and rolled down my window, expecting to hear something, but there was nothing. Absolute silence, no crickets, no wind, not even the sound of my own engine. The air itself seemed to have stopped moving. I watched for 2 or 3 minutes, never thinking to take out my phone. I wasn't scared, just acutely aware of my isolation. Then, without rotating or tilting, the object began to rise slowly and steadily. It drifted straight up, remaining perfectly level until it faded from view against the night sky. No flash, no change in those red dots. It simply ascended and disappeared. After waiting a minute, I drove home to my cul-de-sac in a newer subdivision outside Westport. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. I microwaved some leftover mac and cheese, showered, and went to bed around 2 a.m. Sleep didn't come easily. Not from fear, but from a sense of being inexplicably wired, my mind unable to settle. It was an ordinary morning at 7:30, except for the garbage truck that always wakes up my dog. As I got up, fed her, and made coffee, something unusual caught my eye. A black sedan with tinted windows and no plates was sitting in my driveway, engine off. 2 men in dark suits stood outside, one near the front step, and 2 men approached in a car near my house. When I stepped out onto the porch, they asked a few quick questions without introducing themselves. They were interested in my drive on County Road 700E near the collapsed barn the previous night. I confirmed I had been there on my way home from work. Their probing question came next. Did I see anything unusual? I hesitated, carefully considering my response. One man watched me intently, not threateningly, but as if studying my reactions. I admitted to seeing some weird lights in the sky. The other man, standing by the car, then asked an unexpected question about how often I imagine things at night. His tone was genuinely curious, like someone who had heard similar stories before. They seemed satisfied with my firm responses. Before leaving, the man near me asked about outdoor cameras. When I said no, he simply nodded, thanked me, and they drove away. Later that day, I noticed something odd. My mailbox, part of a group box for the block, had a peculiar smear like oil or ash, and no other mailboxes were marked. I wiped it off, leaving a greasy grey streak, and threw away the paper towel. That night, my dog's behavior became strange. She refused to enter the backyard, standing at the door and whining. When I opened it, she backed away. I walked her out front instead, and she kept looking up at the sky, not barking, just watching. Weeks have passed since then. I haven't seen anything else, but now I take a different route home from work every night. Actually, I'd been out at the Yuma Proving Grounds, Eastern Edge, that afternoon, flying my drone. It's a spot lots of people use to watch the sky. A flat desert landscape stretching in every direction, nothing but low scrub and distant mountains. I always follow the rules. There's a zone around the proving ground where hobbyists are told to stay clear, and I'm not one to cause trouble. I parked on a gravel pole just off Highway 95, launching from my truck's bed around 4:20 p.m. The weather was perfect. Hot, dry, cloudless, with crystal clear visibility. My drone's a DJI Mavic 3 Pro, equipped with the best camera. The plan was simple. Capture a sunset time-lapse for some editing software I'd recently bought. I had a cooler, headphones, and a book. My original plan was to stay out until after dark. The first half hour went smoothly. I was capturing some great shots facing west, with golden light washing over the sand and creating long shadows. While panning the camera north, something unusual caught my attention. A blur zipped through the frame at an incredible speed. Initially, I thought it might be a bird, but when I reviewed the footage frame by frame, something felt off. This wasn't a bird at all. No wings, no recognizable shape. Just a metallic flash like sunlight glinting off chrome. Its movement was unnaturally straight and lightning fast. I started scanning the area and adjusting the gimbal. Seconds later, it happened again. This time I saw it clearly, a thin, dark shape moving across the sky. Too fast for a plane and completely silent. I kept recording. The object made multiple passes, each at a slightly different angle, almost as if it was circling or scanning. It didn't look manned or even machine-built, about 10 or 15 feet long with no wings, no lights, no contrail. It would appear suddenly, shoot past in a straight line, and then simply vanish. When I tried to get a top-down view, everything went wrong. The signal cut out abruptly. The video feed glitched hard and went black. My controller said signal lost, even though the drone was still in visual line of sight. Something wasn't right. I tried the return to home button. Nothing happened. Then the controller powered down completely, despite the battery being at 70%. When I looked up, the drone was gone. There I was, out in the desert, standing on the tailgate of my truck. I'd been scanning the horizon, but there was nothing to see. The silence was eerie. I felt like I was being watched even though I couldn't spot anything around me. I didn't pack up right away, just stood there waiting for something, headlights, a sound, anything. But the desert remained completely quiet. By the time I left, the sun had gone down. I got home around 8:45 to my small house on the edge of Yuma with its fenced yard. I backed into the driveway and sat in the truck with the engine running, feeling unsettled. The desert silence was stuck in my mind. Around 10:30, someone knocked on my door, not the doorbell, but 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My porch lights had been broken for months. So I grabbed a flashlight and checked the peephole. Nothing but darkness. I opened the door just a few inches. A man stood there, average looking, could have been 35 or 55. And he showed up without warning, wearing a black suit and pristine white shirt, his shoes impossibly clean despite the gravel walkway. His hair was slicked back, and his smile never reached his eyes. "You misunderstood the sky," he said. "Let's keep it that way." No introduction, no explanation, just standing there, waiting for a response. I didn't move. He had one hand on the door, the other on an unlit flashlight. He didn't blink. Then he turned and walked down the steps, disappearing into the darkness beyond my porch light. I waited. Silence followed. No car starting, no taillights, nothing. That night, sleep was elusive. I kept the living room lights on, curtains open, repeatedly checking the street. When morning came, I went to my truck and discovered the drone was missing. It had been stored in a locked, hard case under the tunnel cover. The case remained undamaged and zipped, but empty. No signs of forced entry were visible. I searched everywhere. The truck, the garage, my office. I always locked that case. Hoping for answers, I checked the Ring doorbell footage, only to find it had frozen at 3:12 a.m. before resuming normally, something that had never happened before. The empty case still sits in my possession. Filing a report seemed futile. What could I say? That someone stole my drone after a strange desert encounter with a suited man who told me to forget about it. Mid-October called for a break. I planned a solo trip to Ridge Hollow Campground near the Allegheny Front. Years ago, I'd camped here with friends, but this time, silence was my only companion. Phone off, no emails, just trees and quiet. Most leaves had fallen, and nights were cold, hovering in the low 40s, but I was prepared with proper gear. The first night proceeded normally. I parked at Site 12, hiked my pack a few hundred yards, and set up the tent before sundown. No other campers, no distant cars or fires, just wind through bare trees and occasional owl calls. I prepared ramen on my camp stove, read a paperback by headlamp, and fell asleep around 10 o'clock. Midnight brought a necessary bathroom trip. The tent was cold, and I hesitated to unzip unless absolutely urgent. Eventually, discomfort won. The fire had died with only a few glowing charcoal chunks remaining. I slipped on boots, walked a few yards out, and returned. Nothing seemed unusual. Morning revealed something was definitely wrong. The fire pit's rocks had been rearranged into a perfect circle, not just roughly circular, but geometrically precise. Uniform gaps, equal spacing, as if someone had used a compass. I knew I hadn't touched them. My small folding stove sat inside the ring, unused. The time was early, 6:12 a.m., and I checked my phoneless signal. I packed my usual small bag for a familiar hiking route, a 5-mile loop I'd done before. It was a typical afternoon trek around noon, nothing too challenging. As I climbed to a ridge with a decent view, I passed rocky outcrops and noticed someone standing just off the trail, not walking, but positioned as if waiting. His appearance was striking, clean and crisp black pants and jacket, reminiscent of a uniform worn by private security or rent-a-cops. When he stepped onto the trail, his movements were deliberate but not aggressive. "You camping alone?" he asked in a low, flat voice. I confirmed I was solo. Then he requested to see my camera. Something felt immediately off. I hadn't mentioned a camera or its capabilities to anyone, not even in the ranger station's logbook. When I hesitated, he simply repeated his request. I unzipped my day pack and handed over the device. He didn't scroll through the photos, just held it, turned it once, and returned it. "Please don't take pictures of the fire rings," he said. And then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he vanished into the trees, not walking away, but seemingly disappearing down the slope. I stood there, camera in hand, deeply unsettled. The encounter made me uncomfortable enough that I didn't want to walk past that spot again soon. I finished the hike without taking any more pictures. Back at camp that evening, I checked my photos. The circle I remembered was initially clear as day, but an hour later, the thumbnail was completely black. Tapping it revealed a corrupted file message, though all other photos remained intact. That night, sleep was difficult. Noises kept me awake, though not from other people. I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps outside the tent, sounds that always faded when I sat up. The next morning, the rocks had been moved again, not kicked or tossed, but carefully laid out in a strange, curving arc away from the fire pit. Since that day in mid-September, when nights were just starting to cool off, I hadn't camped alone again. My uncle's fishing cabin near Lake Vermilion in Minnesota became my refuge. He let me use it whenever I wanted. It was a simple setup, one room, a wood stove, and a small dock. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. That was precisely the point. I rolled the old aluminum boat out with a 6-pack and some tackle, slowly drifting across the water and catching a few small walleye that I tossed back. As darkness settled, the lake became completely silent, except for water tapping against the hull. Around 10:30, a strange glow appeared in the lake's center. At first, I thought it was another boat, maybe someone with a lantern or large LED lights. But this wasn't moving like a typical boat. Instead, it hovered about 40 or 50 feet above the water, suspended with a pulsing white light that had no beam, no flicker, and no sound, just a slow, rhythmic dimming and brightening. I killed my headlamp and watched, remaining perfectly still. Glancing at my watch, it was 10:41, and I felt like I was losing track of time. Suddenly, the light changed from white to a pale orange, as if someone had instantly flipped a switch. No gradual transition, still no sound. I wanted to record it, but my phone was charging in the cabin. Frozen in place, I watched for what seemed like 10 minutes. Then, just like that, it vanished. Not flying off, but simply disappearing between one blink and the next. I stayed on the water for another half hour, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Was it a drone? Some light trick? But there was no noise, no navigation lights, nothing you'd expect from a low-flying object. Back in the cabin, I locked the door, something I rarely do, and collapsed on the cot with my boots on. I slept maybe 3 hours. By 7 the next morning, I was on the dock with coffee. Thick fog had rolled in, obscuring everything beyond the first tree line. Around 8, a black SUV approached down the gravel path. I heard the tires popping over rocks before I saw the vehicle. 2 men in black suits, no ties, emerged. One was tall and thin, the other broader and around late 50s. Without introductions, the older one asked if I'd experienced anything unusual on the lake the previous night. I chuckled and responded like what? He smiled, but not in a friendly way. I was driving late at night on Route 66, then switched to a smaller highway, cutting through the desert and forest patches. I felt a calm exhaustion from a long day, but I don't remember what happened afterward. The next morning, I woke up in my car on the shoulder of a dusty dirt road with fogged-up windows. At a lake, 2 men approached me. The older one asked if I had a depth finder. I mentioned having an old basic sonar unit that shows depth and sometimes a fish icon. He then inquired if I'd logged anything strange the night before. I replied that I wasn't even using it, just fishing. The silent one walked slowly down the dock, looking out over the water with a notepad, but never writing anything. The older guy asked about phone or radio interference. I explained I didn't have service out there. He nodded as if he already knew. Then he advised in a tired tone that it might be a good idea to fish elsewhere for a while. It didn't sound threatening, more like passing on received advice. Later that day, I tried to check the depth finder log. The tiny SD card that logs sonar history was completely gone, not removed, but vanished. The slot remained locked, and I hadn't touched or looked at it in months. You can't remove the card without unlocking it. I packed up and drove back to Duluth, cutting my trip short. Despite planning to stay through the weekend, I didn't feel scared, just unsettled, like I wasn't supposed to be there. My dashboard clock read 5:47 a.m., which seemed impossible. My last clear memory was stopping for gas near Flagstaff around 10:30 p.m. Those intervening hours were a complete blank. No memories of driving, no recollection of passing towns or gas stations. The car showed no signs of any incident, no dents, no scratches, nothing to explain the missing time. I haven't been back to that lake since, and I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. The desert stretched around me, silent and cold, with my car parked on an unmarked road surrounded by scrub brush and low hills. The night was cool with a hint of summer still lingering when I set up my camera near the edge of my property in northern Vermont. A clear, moonless evening, perfect for star photography. My name's Clara, and I'm just a hobbyist with a decent camera and cheap tripod. Around 10 p.m., I'd been taking shots for about an hour, focusing on familiar constellations like the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia. Suddenly, something caught my eye, a star in the east that behaved differently. It wasn't blinking like a plane or satellite. Instead, its rhythm was slow and deliberate. On, off, pause, on, off, pause. This wasn't a typical flicker from atmospheric distortion or clouds. None of the other stars were doing this. I watched, trying to determine if it was an optical illusion or perhaps a drone with a strange light pattern. A year later, I found myself in a completely different situation. Half my gas tank was full, though I couldn't remember refueling after Flagstaff. I stepped out into cold, dry air. The desert around me carried the scent of sage and earth. No animals moved. No other vehicles were in sight. Just absolute silence broken by a faint wind. Deciding to find my way back to a main road, I grabbed my jacket and started walking. After about a mile, I hit a paved road and followed it east. A motel sign for Desert Pines' lodge appeared. I was only 10 miles from Winslow, but in completely the wrong direction. My phone remained without service. The motel office was open and quiet. A woman who looked like she'd been working all night sat behind the counter. When I asked if anyone had called for me or if my car had been logged anywhere, she simply said no one had been around since the previous night. I rented a room and tried to rest, feeling unsettled by the unexplained gap in my memory. Around 9 a.m., still half awake, someone knocked at my door. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a black suit and long coat, his hair neatly combed, his face completely expressionless. "You're back early," he said. When I asked who he was, he didn't respond. As I cracked the door open, he suddenly stepped back and vanished. No sound of footsteps, no door opening, no car driving away, nothing. I blinked, wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. I don't even know where to start with this. I was driving late at night when something strange happened. The blinking light grew bigger as I came closer to the treetops and then disappeared behind them. I stayed perfectly still, keeping the same rhythm for at least 15 minutes. Then slowly, I started to descend, not dropping suddenly or streaking across the sky like a meteor, but moving downward really slowly, like I was drifting or knowing itself behind the trees. That part really weirded me out. Later, I got home and checked everything. My car was fine. Nothing seemed stolen or damaged. I called my office that afternoon and explained about the trip and how I'd lost time on the road. They said the client had seen me leave at 8 p.m., but no one knew where I was after that. When I got home a few days later, I checked the GPS history on my phone. It showed the route from Flagstaff toward Winslow, but with a big gap between 10:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. and a weird detour on back roads I didn't remember taking. I asked a mechanic to check my car. They said everything worked fine. No problems with brakes, steering, or engine. I still don't know what happened that night or where I was during those missing hours. I sat down on my bed, my heart pounding. I didn't tell anyone about the incident right away. Who would believe it? Throughout the whole day, I kept checking outside, half expecting something to happen. The next day, I told my best friend Maggie about what I saw. She teased me, suggesting I might have been looking at a blinking at or a satellite, but I knew what I had seen. Over the next week, I kept looking up every night, around the same time, hoping to see it again. It never showed up. About 6 days later, I was sitting in the town library's small reading nook, surrounded by a stack of astronomy books. The library was quiet, almost silent enough to hear dust settling. While flipping through a book about constellations, a guy suddenly sat down across from me. He appeared without a sound, calm and composed, wearing a black jacket and jeans, looking normal, maybe in his late 30s, clean cut, but with a serious expression. Without breaking his gaze, he asked, "Are you still watching the sky?" Startled, I nodded, unable to formulate a response, and I can't explain the man in black. But every time I'm driving late, especially on quiet back roads, I find myself looking over my shoulder just in case. I kept my camera pointed at the sky and managed to get some shots of something unusual. Usually stars don't move like this, right? Strange occurrences started piling up after that cryptic encounter. It began with a brief, knowing smile and a warning about being careful what I looked for. A small card was left on the table with a name, contact, and an unfamiliar phone number before he disappeared. My instincts told me not to call. Instead, I pocketed the card and left. That night, I returned to the backyard, hoping to see the blinking star again. But the sky held only regular, unmoving stars. Soon, weird things began happening. My phone would randomly lose signal, even at home. The camera battery drained quickly, and I felt constantly watched. Not paranoid, but with a quiet sense of something just beyond perception. One evening, walking home from the grocery store, a car passed me twice. What struck me wasn't just the repeated pass, but the car's lack of license plate and the driver's completely obscured face. When I caught the driver glancing directly at me, I quickened my pace and went inside without looking back. I told Maggie about the car, the strange guy, and the blinking star. She suggested reporting it to the police, but I knew I'd sound crazy. What did they do? A guy in a black jacket saying weird stuff and blinking lights behind trees. It all seemed ridiculous. One warm night, I left the back door slightly open while working inside. A low, smooth humming noise caught my attention, like a distant engine, but quieter. It lasted about 20 seconds before fading. When I stepped outside and looked up, the sky was empty. The next morning, my camera had vanished from the kitchen table. The back door was closed, the lock untouched. I never found it. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I tried to push it all out of my mind, staying inside during evenings. But I kept thinking about the blinking star, its slow descent, and the unexplained. As a journalist who delves deep into rural mysteries and local tales often overlooked, I'm Sarah Donovan. My latest investigation started like countless others. A farmer's call about inexplicable crop damage near Lane Mesa, Texas. The day was typical for early summer. Bright sky, wispy clouds, and the air thick with dry grass and dust. I navigated my old pickup down a dirt road, approaching the field's edge. One peculiar 50-foot corn patch caught my attention immediately. The stalks were flattened and bent in unnatural directions, unlike typical wind or rain damage. It seemed deliberate, as if something or someone had systematically pushed the plants down. Hours passed as I photographed the area from various angles, capturing close-ups of the ground and stalks. The soil was hard and cracked, with a faint, almost metallic odor lingering in the air. Jim, the farmer, seemed unsettled. His quiet demeanor suggested he knew more than he was sharing, repeatedly muttering, "It's not normal." That evening in my motel room while reviewing my notes and photographs, a strange phone call interrupted my work. The caller ID was blank, and instead of a voice, static and faint clicking sounds filled the line. Slow, deliberate breathing emerged, not heavy, just consistently present. For 2 minutes, I listened intently. Attempting to return the call sent me directly to voicemail. Initially dismissing it as a prank, the unusual breathing continued to occupy my thoughts. When I shared the experience with Jim the next morning, His response sent chills down my spine. "You're not the only one," he said. "Some of us have been getting these calls lately. No one talks, just that noise. People say it's nothing, but it feels significant." Driving back to town, an eerie sensation of being watched settled over me. It was subtle, like a weight pressing against my chest. Constantly checking my rearview mirror, I half expected to see a follower, but the road remained empty. Later that evening, as I unloaded my belongings at my Lame Mesa apartment, a knock at the door broke the silence. The backyard was lit by a small fire pit and string lights along the deck railing. It was a late summer evening in northern Michigan, with a clear sky showing a billion stars and air that was cool but not cold. We were all outside, me, my wife Lisa, our daughter Abby, and our son Max, roasting marshmallows and chatting casually. Max was in the middle of trying to convince Abby that his flashlight could cut through anything. Typical kid talk. Suddenly, Abby went quiet and pointed toward the woods at the edge of our property. I followed her gaze and saw something extraordinary. 3 perfect circles of light drifting slowly across the yard. These lights were about the size of basketballs, maybe slightly larger, glowing with a soft, almost oily white light. They weren't like bulbs or flashlights, but more like light without a definitive source, just hanging suspended in the air. They moved smoothly and silently, side by side, gliding as if on invisible rails about 2 or 3 feet above the grass. Lisa and I exchanged a look. "Do you see that?" she asked. Max stood wide-eyed next to Abby, frozen in place. I tried to stay calm, but honestly, I didn't know what to say. I reached for my phone intending to take a picture, but when I unlocked the screen and pointed it toward the lights, everything went black. No camera, no flashlight, nothing worked. This wasn't the first strange occurrence I'd experienced. Earlier, a man dressed entirely in black had appeared at my door, uttering cryptic words before vanishing without a trace. My work on a crop damage story began unraveling, with notes seeming to shift subtly and photographs developing odd shadows. When I mentioned these experiences to others, no one acknowledged anything unusual. Something was happening, but I couldn't explain what. It was neither a clear warning nor just a weird coincidence. Something about it made me pull back. I still don't understand what any of it meant, just that for a while I was caught in something that didn't quite belong here, and I didn't want to be talked about. But the phone was dead, even though I wasn't. We stood in silence after watching lights drift slowly toward the tree line and then vanish behind the pines, leaving no trace, no sound, no rustling branches, no movement at all. Max broke the quiet after a minute, asking what was that. I didn't answer. Later that night I kept checking the yard from the kitchen window, but nothing else appeared. The night returned to normal with familiar sounds, crickets chirping, an occasional owl hooting. Lisa was first to notice something strange the next morning. She saw Mr. Garrison talking with a man dressed entirely in black, seemingly trying to blend into the morning fog. The encounter wasn't dramatic, just a brief, quiet conversation lasting about 5 minutes before the man drove away in a dark sedan. When I asked Mr. Garrison about it, he simply blinked and said, "I didn't talk to anyone." Something felt off. Lisa then shared another odd detail. Our always locked mailbox had been opened, containing a black folder, thin, slick, and completely blank. The folder was unusually warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight despite the cool morning. I placed it on the kitchen table, but it didn't cool down for hours. That night, the kids were restless, and Lisa kept glancing out the windows, seemingly expecting those lights to reappear. Strange sensations followed. We felt watched, with an eerie feeling of not being alone, yet unable to identify who might be present. Faint humming began, sometimes outside the window, sometimes within the walls. Not loud enough to be certain, but enough to make me pause and listen. One morning the black folder had vanished without a trace. No note, no indication of how it disappeared. Neighbors hadn't noticed anything unusual. Mr. Stay and Garrison remained reclusive, his eyes darting away whenever I looked his way. We returned to our routines, but the feeling never truly left. Occasionally, when I'm outside alone, I catch a glimpse of something just beyond the yard's edge, a flash of white light, a shifting shape between trees. Each time, something unusual caught my eye that night on the dock of my small cabin on Lake Crescent in Washington. Just after sunset, the sky was clearing following a light rain, and everything smelled of wet pine and earth. I was playing with my phone, trying to capture some evening light over the water, just quiet nature clips with no fancy editing. At first, small pinpricks of light hovered over the lake's far shore near some steep hills. They weren't like stars or familiar celestial objects. The light seemed natural, faint and steady, shifting positions slowly without following any clear pattern. When I zoomed in with my phone camera, I saw soft blue and white glows that were dim but unmistakably present. One light blinked off and then reappeared a few seconds later, slightly higher and closer to the shore. The lake was quiet, with only occasional fish splashes and wind rustling through trees. That's when I noticed a figure standing completely still at the opposite edge of the dock near the water. I hadn't heard any approach, no footsteps, no voices. The person was dressed entirely in black, not just dark clothing, but something that seemed purposefully designed to blend into the night. No hat, no reflective surfaces, just pure black. I initially thought it might be someone fishing or wandering, but something felt off. The figure didn't move or shift weight at all. I called out first softly, "Hey, are you okay?" Then, a bit louder, "Hello, do you need help?" The response was unsettling. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, not in a natural way, but almost mechanically. Then it began moving sideways, gliding along the shoreline while maintaining eye contact. Suddenly, it moved behind a group of trees and vanished without a sound. No broken branches, nothing. By the time I turned my phone, the mysterious lights across the lake had disappeared completely, as if they had never existed. I couldn't determine whether I'd imagined the entire encounter or if it was real. Back inside the cabin, I double-checked the door locks. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual in this remote location, but the night felt heavy, as if something was watching from the dark woods. The next morning, after getting coffee in Port Angeles, I returned to find a black sedan parked near the cabin, a vehicle that hadn't been there the night before. I wonder, is someone still watching? Our journey through the Mojave Desert began just after sunset. Karen and I were driving back to Los Angeles from a weekend in Vegas. The sky was warm, shifting from orange to purple, while the desert quickly cooled around us. I was driving and Karen played with the radio, searching for a station. It was one of those peaceful drives where soft radio music accompanies the rolling miles. Suddenly, a strange light appeared just beyond the highway, rising slowly over a low ridge like a detached headlamp or flare. It hung steady, a solid white glow, perfectly round and motionless. In an instant, the light vanished, as if switched off, and simultaneously, the radio died. Static consumed the car, growing louder, until Karen switched it off completely. We exchanged a look of shared bewilderment. "Did you see that?" I asked. She nodded, squeezing my hand. The road behind us remained empty. No other vehicles, no flashing lights, just us and an overwhelming silence. We continued driving as the desert darkened, eventually spotting a rest stop ahead. Days later, I found myself at a secluded cabin, reflecting on that strange desert encounter. One afternoon, I noticed a sedan parked in a nearby driveway. It was meticulously clean with no visible license plate and windows tinted so darkly that the interior was completely obscured. As I approached the vehicle, a sense of unease grew. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, signaling something was not right. Nothing seemed quite right. Through the tinted windows, a brief movement caught my eye, but when I stopped to look closely, nothing was there. I carefully checked the area around me. No footprints marked the ground, and no other vehicles were nearby. The road was a dead end, rarely used, especially midweek. No one was around, though. I initially thought I might be a local checking the area. The car remained parked all day, and I hesitated about calling the police. They would likely dismiss my concerns as the ramblings of a local or a lost traveler. Instead, I stayed inside with the windows locked. The entire afternoon, I watched the woods intently, sensing someone might be lurking just beyond my line of sight. By evening, the sedan had vanished, just like the mysterious figure from the previous night. I've returned to the cabin several times since, but nothing similar has ever happened again. No unexplained lights, no strange figures, no mysterious vehicles. Yet the memory of that quiet night lingers. How that silent figure watched without a word before disappearing without a sound. Early one October morning, I was hiking a trail in northern Vermont. The fog hung low between the trees, creating a hushed stillness. I'd left the trailhead around 7 a.m., hoping to cover ground before the sun climbed too high. This wasn't my first time on this trail, but something felt different that day. Later that night, Karen and I stopped at a remote gas station. Our car pulled up to the pumps next to a tiny store. When the engine went quiet, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick and heavy. Not a peaceful silence, but an unsettling emptiness. As we stepped out and stretched, we both scanned the area, sensing something might emerge from the shadows. Near the payphones at the edge of the parking lot, a man caught my attention. He stood motionless in a plain black suit, hair slicked back, his face unreadable in the dim light. What struck me was his strange behavior. He wasn't on his phone or doing anything, just standing there. His lips were moving silently, mouthing a single word back. I looked away briefly, then back again. He was still watching us. Karen noticed him too, giving me a quick nod. That seemed to ask, "Do you see that?" We got back in the car without much conversation, locking the doors. As I backed out, I glanced at the man again. He remained rooted to the same spot, completely still. We drove on, the car's silence feeling heavier than before. The radio, which had been dead for miles, suddenly came back to life. Static faded, and a station hummed through the speakers. I tried changing channels, but everything worked normally now. Neither of us spoke much. Karen kept checking the rearview mirror, and I frequently glanced at the side mirrors, half expecting to see the man following us or a strange light rising behind a hill. By the time we reached the city limits, night had fully settled. The weirdness felt like a bubble about to burst, and we were both relieved to be out of that empty desert stretch. When I got home, I checked the news. No power outages, no missing people, nothing unusual. Sometimes when I'm driving late or sitting on the porch, I think about that light rising behind the hill and the man mouthing back at the rest stop. I don't know what it meant. Maybe it was nothing, but it stuck with me. That quiet, watching feeling. I don't bring it up, not even with Karen. Some things you just keep to yourself. The trail remained eerily silent as I hiked that morning. My boots crunched on fallen leaves as I walked the trail. Silence surrounded me. No animals stirred, no rustling in the underbrush. About 2 miles in, something changed. A strange sound began behind me. At first, I thought it was just my footsteps echoing or branches snapping. But then the noise shifted. A faint mechanical clicking started, like tiny gears turning or metal tapping. Definitely not natural. I stopped and turned around multiple times, scanning the empty trail surrounded by thick trees. Nothing moved. I picked up my pace, trying to ignore the sound, yet the clicking continued not right behind me but close. I scanned the soft, trained underbrush for any sign of wildlife, but saw nothing. No birds, no squirrels. I tried convincing myself it was a loose pack part or a falling rock. When I checked my gear, everything was secure. No loose straps could explain the noise. I even dropped my pack and stood still listening. The clicking paused briefly, then resumed, faint but definitely mechanical. As the sun broke through the trees and fog lifted, the sound persisted. A weird pressure emerged, like something watched me from just beyond reach. The trail felt longer, the woods denser. I wanted to turn back but refused to admit I was scared. By noon, I reached the parking lot. My old Subaru sat near the entrance. A man in a black suit stood beside it, neat pressed, no tie, his hair slicked back, face expressionless. He wasn't on a phone or doing anything specific, just brushing dust off his shoulders. Except there was no dust. His suit was too clean, too perfect for the dirty lot. I approached cautiously. "Hi," I said. He looked at me slowly and nodded. "It isn't for you." His calm, low voice made me shiver. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked into the trees, vanishing into the fog like a ghost. I was camping alone out near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, trying to get away from everything for a few days. Just me, a small tent, and a couple of books. It was late September, and the nights were already chilly, but the days were still warm enough to sit outside and watch the sunset without a jacket. On the second evening, I was sitting by the fire just after twilight, watching the sky darken and the stars start to come out. I'd already eaten and was about to pack up the fire when I noticed something weird out beyond the trees. I stood there wondering if I'd imagined the entire encounter. Driving home, the mysterious sound and the strange man lingered in my mind. I was driving through the Mojave Desert late one night, heading back to LA after visiting a friend in Nevada. One of those solo trips where the road feels endless and the radio eventually fades out because you're so far from any city. Hours on the road, the air outside dry and cool, even though it was summer and the sky was pitch black except for stars. Somewhere around midnight, about 50 miles from the nearest town, a faint glow caught my eye off to the right above the desert floor. A few hundred yards from my camp, there was a light, a soft glowing orb, maybe the size of a basketball, just hovering a little above the ground. It wasn't blinking or flashing like a plane or helicopter, and it didn't move in a straight line. Instead, it sort of drifted slowly, almost floating in no particular direction. The light was a pale blue-white, almost like moonlight, but more intense. Strangely, it didn't cast shadows on anything around it. I kept watching, thinking it might be some kind of drone or a lantern someone had left loose. Then it started moving toward the ridge slowly at first, then faster, like it was gliding. I could see it disappear behind the trees in the ridge. No sound at all, no engines or buzz, just the quiet of the forest around me. After a minute or so, I got up and started walking back to my tent. That's when I noticed a car parked maybe 50 yards away, just sitting on the edge of the clearing where I'd set up camp. It was black, no logos, no decals, just a clean, dark sedan. The headlights were off, but the engine was idling. You could see the exhaust in the cold air, steady and quiet. I froze for a second, staring at the car. I hadn't heard it arrive. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the nearest road was at least a mile away. I thought about calling out, but something made me stay quiet. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark suit, buttoned all the way up with a white shirt and a thin black tie. His hair was neat and his face was expressionless. He looked me straight in the eye when he came closer, standing maybe 10 feet away. "Some things aren't meant to be found," he said without any introduction or explanation. I opened my mouth, wanting to ask what. As time passed, I never heard the strange clicking sound again. I didn't see the man in black anywhere else. I don't know why that clicking was there or who that guy was. I guess some parts of the trail aren't meant for us, even if we think they are. I was driving through the desert late at night when something caught my eye. A light, round and steady like a basketball, glowed with a soft white pulse that seemed almost alive. At first I thought it might be a campfire or a flare, but its movement was different. More like a hovering orb that breathed slowly. I pulled over on the shoulder, curious but cautious. The desert was completely silent except for my engine cooling down. When I stepped out, I saw the light hovering about 20 feet off the ground, gently pulsing with no sound, no wind, no bugs around, just that strange orb. I wanted a better look but didn't want to get too close, so I stayed near my car, shining my flashlight in its direction. Interestingly, the orb's light seemed to dim and brighten in response, almost as if it was aware of me. A weird chill ran through me despite the temperature. Suddenly, a man appeared walking toward me from the darkness. He wore a black suit, perfectly pressed, with a white shirt and no tie. His shoes made no sound on the gravel, and I hadn't heard him approach. He stopped about 10 feet away, hands at his sides, eyes locked on mine. His pale face was expressionless yet serious. He seemed about to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he nodded once and then walked back to his car, got in, and drove off slowly, his tail lights fading into the trees. I stayed there for a long time after he left, watching where he had disappeared. The forest remained quiet, but I felt watched. I wasn't sure whether to stay or leave, but I chose to remain for the night. Morning revealed nothing unusual, no footprints, except mine, no sign the car had been there. I packed up and left, driving through winding mountain roads. Something about that night lingered with me. The desert's stillness, the mysterious light, the silent man, none of it made sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened, even though I couldn't explain what. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. A strange symbol folded in my pocket, and a sense that I'd witnessed something beyond my understanding. My hike in the Adirondacks that early fall afternoon was about squeezing in a trail day before the cold set in. Panther Gorge wasn't popular, which was exactly why I chose it. quiet, remote, mostly untouched. I'd been hiking alone for hours under partly cloudy skies, with that low grey light that makes everything feel muted. Halfway through the loop, the path narrowed to barely more than a dirt track. The woods thickened around me, and suddenly, all sound disappeared. Then a flash came from just off the trail, deep in the woods, brighter than a camera or lightning bug. I squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. The silence was intense, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. Whenever I thought I heard something, it vanished instantly. After about 10 minutes, the trail opened into a small clearing near the road leading back to the trailhead parking. As I was hiking, and saw I was hiking, feeling uneasy about getting off the trail before dark, I spotted a black sedan parked on the roadside. Its engine was running, but the lights were off. The car looked like something you'd see in the city, an older model with no distinguishing features. The driver caught my attention. He seemed ordinary at first glance, mid-40s, clean-shaven with dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit and open-collared white shirt. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but he was looking directly at me. When I slowed down, he asked, "You okay?" in a clear, low voice. I mumbled that I'd just finished my hike, noticing my voice sounded strange in the still air. His next words carried an unexpected weight. "The forest keeps its secrets," he said. "Respect them." I wasn't sure how to respond. When I tried to clarify, asking if he meant the light or the silence in the woods, he simply shook his head. Later, driving home, I glanced at a paper. No change, no glow, just a weird, crude drawing. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that man? Why did he want me to forget? What did the symbol mean? I never saw the orb again. Never saw the man in the suit. But sometimes, driving alone at night, I look out into the desert and wonder if that quiet glow is still somewhere watching. The night was incredibly still as I drove, a faint glow catching my attention and causing me to slow down. About 100 feet above the ground, just off the road, an object with soft fuzzy edges hovered. It wasn't a typical aircraft, no blinking lights or standard signals. Instead, it emitted a calm white light that seemed to pulse gently, almost like it was breathing. The sky behind it was crystal clear, with stars providing a sharp backdrop. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder and killed the engine, reaching for my phone to capture the moment, but something strange happened. The screen flickered and went black when I tried to take a picture. Frustrated, I set the phone down and continued watching. Minutes passed and the light began to fade slowly, as if someone were dimming a switch. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished completely. The silence was profound. No engine hum, no buzzing, just the typical desert night sounds. Distant coyotes howled, and wind whispered through trees. My heart was racing, but I wasn't panicked. More than anything, I was confused, wondering if I'd witnessed some unusual light phenomenon or an unknown military test. Just as I prepared to restart the engine and continue driving, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. An old black sedan pulled up quickly, stopping about 20 feet behind me. Something felt off. No visible license plates, tinted windows. The driver rolled down the passenger window, and a calm but firm voice spoke. "You didn't see anything," he said. I blinked. "What?" "Keep your eyes on the road," he repeated. The forest was dark and silent. The highway behind the car stretched empty. My stomach tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. "Not someone you need to worry about," he responded. His eyes were steady, his expression unreadable. In an instant, the sedan peeled away, tires making the only sound. Before I could ask anything more, he closed the window, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. The car turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there for a while, watching, feeling the cold seep into my bones as the sun began to set. The strange encounter lingered with me as I returned to my car. Something about the moment felt unnatural. That night, driving home, I couldn't shake thoughts of the man, the car, and the inexplicable silence. Nothing about the experience made sense, and part of me didn't want it to. The woods held their mystery, and I was content to leave it that way. The night sky had always been a fascination of mine. Out in my backyard, camera in hand, I'd often try to capture the stars, not as a professional, but as someone who simply loved looking up. This particular night seemed perfect for stargazing. Cool air, A light fog settling after some rain. I'd positioned myself near the yard's edge, camera pointed at a star cluster I'd recently learned about. While adjusting focus and aperture, something bizarre caught my attention. One star simply blinked out, not fading, not obscured, just switching off like a light bulb. I thought it might be my eyes playing tricks, so I kept watching. Then, another star vanished, and another in an almost methodical sequence. The entire cluster gradually dimmed, until only 1 or 2 stars remained. Frozen in place, I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. A quick scan of the yard revealed nothing unusual, no planes, drones, or neighboring light sources, just silence and a strange celestial display. After a minute, the stars blinked back on, precisely in reverse order. The experience didn't end there. Driving later, I kept checking my rearview mirror, sensing something lingering just beyond sight. A black car had appeared earlier, disappearing into the night as if it had never existed. The road was now empty, nothing but desert and stars. When I finally reached the truck stop in Prescott, I discovered my photos were completely gone. Not just missing, but wiped clean, as if deleted at the source. I hadn't touched my phone since the incident. Sharing the story with other drivers mostly resulted in shrugs or jokes. Maybe they thought I was making it up, or perhaps they simply didn't want to get involved. I still don't understand what I witnessed that night. The mysterious lights, the black car, the vanishing stars, it all felt like something not meant to be discussed. Yet the experience has stayed with me, haunting every subsequent drive down that highway. The night I went camping alone in the Cascade Mountains was different. I'd been hiking a lot that summer, mostly solo, but this night stood out. The stars seemed unusually bright, almost mechanical, like they were being switched on and off in a synchronized order. The entire experience lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. Something was watching. The road wasn't just asphalt and dirt anymore. I haven't been back out that way since, not alone. The next morning at the cafe where I work, 2 men in black suits sat quietly in a corner table. They weren't typical customers. One wore sunglasses despite the dim morning light, and neither ordered anything nor looked away from me during my entire shift. My hands shook slightly as I took photos, trying to convince myself it was just a weird atmospheric phenomenon or a camera glitch. I kept stealing glances at them, feeling like they were waiting for something. Eventually, I approached and offered coffee. The man without sunglasses gave a faint, tight smile and said, "Just keeping watch." Throughout the day, they remained still, no phones, no reading, just watching. I tried to act normal, but it felt like the walls were closing in. When my shift ended, they left silently, slipping out as if they'd never been there. I can't stop thinking about that night's sky, with its blinking stars and those men watching me like I was the only thing that mattered. I don't know if they were connected or if I was just imagining things getting weird. Since then, I've avoided going outside at night to look at the stars. The sky feels different now, empty, like something's missing or watching back. I've reviewed my photos and videos dozens of times. The stars blinked, but no one believed me. I haven't seen those men again, but sometimes early at the cafe I catch a glimpse of a black suit in the window reflection or feel eyes on me. Even when the place is empty, I have no answers. Just a feeling that some things aren't meant to be seen, and some people make sure of that. I typically go camping to find peace away from work's constant noise and stress. This time I picked a quiet lakeside spot far from the main trail and other campers, sticking to my usual habit of avoiding the ranger station and seeking total isolation. Just before sunset, I set up my tent in the soft late summer warmth. After a simple dinner, I settled into my sleeping bag, watching stars peek through pine branches. Everything felt calm and serene. Sometime around midnight, something stirred me awake. Initially, I thought it might be a typical forest animal like a deer or raccoon, but these footsteps were different, deliberate and methodical. They moved in a precise pattern, circling my tent systematically, right side, back, left side, then back again, completely motionless. I listened intently. The footsteps continued their calculated path, occasionally pausing right outside the tent fabric. Darkness obscured everything, and my flashlight was inside the tent. I didn't want to move and risk alerting whatever was out there. The sound was soft yet distinct, like someone was pacing, watching, contemplating. For about 20 minutes, I remained frozen, hoping whatever it was would leave. But the circling continued. Suddenly an unnerving silence descended. No wind, no wildlife sounds, just an oppressive quiet pressing against the tent walls. Then the footsteps started again, even slower, gradually fading into the trees. I couldn't relax for the rest of the night. The forest no longer felt comforting but unsettling. Early the next morning I packed up quickly and headed back to the trailhead, deciding to check in with the ranger station. When I arrived, the station was empty except for a man in an unusual black suit. He looked up and asked, "Are you Emily Parker?" Surprised, I cautiously confirmed. I hadn't told anyone my full name or checked in anywhere. He just smiled faintly. This wasn't my first unusual mountain experience. Another evening near Bend, Oregon, I was out photographing after sunset. The sky was clear and chilly, with a faint smell of pine and dry grass. I had my DSLR and tripod, hoping to capture some star shots or interesting light reflections. Around 9 p.m., while adjusting my camera settings in a small clearing, I noticed something strange, a cluster of details that would soon become an unforgettable encounter. Lights far off on the ridge caught my attention, moving in a pattern I couldn't immediately understand. Their movement wasn't like airplanes or steady tower lights. Instead, they pulsed smoothly, almost like a wave, and I started recording, wondering if I was witnessing some kind of drone formation or unusual signal reflection. The pattern felt deliberate, not random. I kept filming, trying to zoom in, but the distance made details impossible to discern. After about 10 minutes, footsteps behind me broke my concentration. Turning quickly, I expected another hiker, but two men in black suits stood there, looking like government or security officials. This was miles from any road or building, which made their presence strange. Neither spoke initially. They just watched me intently. One finally broke the silence with a calm request, "Can we see your footage?" I hesitated, but handed over my camera. They crouched down, examining the screen. One pulled out a phone and recorded my footage, as if cataloging it. When I asked who they were and what they wanted, they didn't answer directly. Instead, one simply said, "You should move on." Before I could question further, he stood and walked inside the station. When I looked back, the chair was empty. I blinked and checked around the building, but no trace remained. No footsteps, no mysterious men. I didn't feel threatened exactly, but something felt deeply wrong. I left the mountains that day feeling watched, as if the woods themselves were warning me. Since then, I haven't returned, and if I do, I'll definitely check in first. Countless nights I've spent wondering about that day, the memory haunting me with crystal clarity. Standing there with my camera, I watched them exchange knowing glances before walking away into the trees, vanishing like shadows. One had looked directly at me and delivered a chilling message, "This is not your story to tell." Later, when I tried reviewing the footage, something was terribly wrong. The video files were completely corrupted, opening briefly before freezing or dissolving into static. I used every recovery tool available, but nothing worked. The footage was gone, entirely erased. Now, my friends don't believe me when I tell this story. I know my story sounds unbelievable without evidence. It might seem like a wild hallucination, but I experienced something real. That day changed everything. I woke up in my car on the shoulder of a 2-lane highway in northern Oregon. Sunlight cut through the windshield, and my head throbbed like I'd been struck. Highway traffic hummed around me, but everything felt dreamlike and fuzzy. The last clear memory was grabbing coffee at a gas station about an hour earlier. After that, a complete blank. My phone was cracked and unresponsive. When I tried the ignition, the car started immediately. Just as I prepared to pull back onto the road, a pristine black sedan appeared behind me, its windows tinted completely opaque. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in a black suit, late 30s or early 40s, clean-shaven with perfectly combed dark hair. "Not yet," he said softly, his voice smooth and controlled. His expression was unreadable. "You shouldn't be driving right now," he added. Something felt off beyond my headache, like I was stuck in a weird pause. "I need to get going." I tried to sound firmer than I felt. He didn't smile or soften his tone, but something about the way he spoke made me hesitate. Before I could ask what he meant, another man stepped out of the sedan. Same style, black suit, dark hair, serious face. He walked up to my car and looked in without blinking. I locked the doors, my heart hammering. The first guy looked at me and said, "You saw something you shouldn't have. That's why you're here." I opened my mouth to argue, but I had no answers. What had I seen? I racked my brain, but only a strange memory gap surfaced. "Look, I don't know what you think I saw. I don't even remember half of today," I stammered. "That will change. We'll help you remember. Just relax," he replied. Since that day, I've avoided the mountains at night. Whenever I look up at the sky near that ridge, I can't help but wonder if those strange lights will return. Deep down, I'm certain I'm not meant to understand what truly happened. And I was driving home through the outskirts of New Richmond, Wisconsin, on a late October Thursday evening. The sky was mostly clear, with a cool, damp chill settling in as the sun dipped below the horizon. Just after 7 p.m., something caught my attention on a stretch of road I'd traveled countless times before. Near the large coal-fired power plant everyone in town jokes about but relies on, I spotted unusual lights hovering overhead. These weren't standard work lights or tower warning beacons. They were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a pattern that defied normal equipment logic. Moving slowly but with clear purpose, they seemed to be surveying or scanning the facility. Curiosity mixed with caution, I pulled over and killed my headlights. Cracking the window slightly, I listened. The air carried a faint ozone and burning coal smell, beneath which was a sharp metallic scent I couldn't identify. The lights blinked intermittently, not like an emergency signal, but more like a coded sequence of communication. When I reached for my phone to take a picture, the screen started glitching, flickering on and off. I quickly put it down and just sat there, watching the strange scene unfold. Now, hours later, 2 men in black stood before me. One pulled out a small notebook and asked where we were around 10 p.m. last night. My voice shook as I responded, "I was at home." He nodded slowly, then looked at his partner. "And yet you were seen somewhere you didn't belong." Pressure filled my chest as they loomed over me. They didn't move or threaten me directly, but their presence felt heavy. The second man produced a small silver badge, plain metal. "No words or logos. You're going to want to cooperate," he said. My hands trembled. "What are you talking about? Why are you here?" The first man smiled, just the tiniest edge of it ensuring I'd stay quiet. The highway stretched silent around us, punctuated only by distant car horns and the growing heat of the day. And arc and silent, through the rear-view mirror, I noticed no headlights, just a shadowy shape. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a clean-shaven man in his mid-40s. His slick black hair and dark suit seemed out of place. "Evening," he said in a measured tone. He asked if I worked at the power plant. I explained I was just passing through, heading home from downtown on Main Street. He nodded, as if my explanation made perfect sense. Moments later, another car arrived. A second man stepped out, dressed similarly in a black suit, pale as someone who hadn't seen sunlight in ages. The first man leaned closer to my window. I told him I'd seen strange lights around 7:10 while heading home from work. They were hovering over the northern cooling towers for about 5 minutes before moving behind the towers and vanishing. The second man approached, hands folded calmly. He asked if I'd seen any workers or maintenance crews. No, I hadn't. Just those lights. A tense silence followed as they seemed to process my words. Then came their unexpected request. "Do you mind if we take a look at your phone?" I declined, which seemed to heighten the tension. Earlier that day, 2 men in a sedan had approached me on the shoulder of the road. One came out while the other watched from the car. "You'll remember soon enough," he said before they sped off, leaving me alone. The quiet that returned felt different, heavier, with something unseen lingering. I sat there for a long time before starting my car. The drive home was silent, with frequent glances in the rear-view mirror, half expecting the black sedan to reappear. At home, I checked the clock. 3 p.m. This meant a huge chunk of last night was missing from my memory, somehow connected to these men in black. I never called the cops or told anyone. No explanation made sense. All I knew was that I'd been watched, maybe controlled, and whatever had happened wasn't over. Strangest of all, after that day, I'd occasionally catch a flash of a black car just out of sight. Always when I was alone, always for just a second. And I don't think they're done with me yet. I was out hiking in the northern Adirondacks late September, enjoying the perfect weather, cool but clear, with leaves just starting to change. and that crisp smell of pine and wet earth, I had planned a 2-day camping trip near an abandoned cabin I'd discovered in an old guidebook from a dusty outdoor shop in Saranac Lake. Something felt off as I approached the power plant that night. 2 cars drove away, the second pulling ahead and disappearing first, with the first car following. I sat there a minute, feeling like I'd been watched in a way I didn't want to be. When I got back on the road, the power plant was dark again, with just the usual orange glow from the towers. No unusual lights. I told my boyfriend Mark about what I saw. He was skeptical, suggesting it was probably just government agents or company security making sure I didn't spread rumors, but I wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, weird things started happening. My phone kept cutting out calls and messages without explanation. Once, while driving past the plant in daylight, I saw a black SUV parked near the gate. The windows were so darkly tinted, it looked like a black hole, with no one visible and the driver's seat empty. A few nights later, I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window around 2 a.m. When I looked, no one was there. The street light flickered strangely, and the air smelled metallic again. I started avoiding that stretch of road after work, taking a longer route that added 20 minutes to my commute. I didn't want to see those lights again or the men in black. Weeks passed quietly until one evening when 2 men approached me. The second man nodded slowly. "We understand," he said. "It's important that no one else talks about this. The company is already aware and handling it." The first man pulled out a small badge. Not police, more like a government ID, though the details were blurry in the dim light. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said flatly, "and your discretion." Both men returned to their cars, vehicles with no visible license plates, and quietly disappeared, leaving me with more questions than answers. The building was empty except for me, and it was nearly 10 p.m. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure standing across the street in the shadows of a street lamp. But when I looked again, nothing was there. Late afternoon, around 3 p.m., I arrived at a small, weathered cabin with broken windows and a sagging porch. Nobody seemed to have been here for years. I set up camp a little way off near a cluster of fir trees and settled in to explore the surrounding area. The silence was complete except for the usual forest sounds, bird calls and wind rustling through branches. As evening approached and the sun dipped low, I decided to walk back toward the cabin. It was around 7 p.m., and twilight was painting the sky a deep blue. Suddenly, I saw something extraordinary. A glowing orb hovering about 30 yards from the cabin, just above the ground. It was round and pure white, but not harsh, more like a soft internal light that glowed gently. The orb remained still, floating about 2 feet off the ground. I kept thinking about those lights, the men, and that badge I never got a proper look at. It all feels like part of something bigger I'm not supposed to know about. But I also know I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange one night, and that maybe it's better left alone. I still drive past the place sometimes, but I don't stop, and I never mention what I saw to anyone else. I froze. At first I thought it might be a lantern or abandoned campfire, but there was no smoke, no heat, no sound. The light was too steady and clean. The forest had fallen into an unusual quiet that felt different, as if everything had suddenly hushed. For about 5 minutes, I watched the orb. Then it began moving slowly toward the cabin, gliding just above the ground, steady and silent. When it reached the porch, it hovered near the broken window for a moment before vanishing instantly. Just like that, gone. That night, sleep was difficult. I kept thinking about the orb and could swear I heard a faint humming noise occasionally. It wasn't loud, just a soft vibrating sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Early the next morning, I packed up and headed down the trail. About halfway back to my car at the trailhead, I encountered a strange man standing near the forest's edge. He wore a black suit, the kind you'd expect at a funeral or formal business meeting. Late November nights at the old radio tower on Millbrook's Edge were usually quiet. My workspace was a cramped room atop a rusty metal structure, with fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. I arrived around 9 p.m., climbing the spiral staircase and settling into my routine of managing emergency broadcasts for Nego. The silence was almost complete, broken only by soft equipment hum and occasional transmitter beeps. Condensation streaked the windows, creating an eerie atmosphere. Around midnight, something changed. The radio started crackling with static at first, nothing unusual, but then the interference grew louder, different. This wasn't standard signal or weather interference. The white noise felt intentional, like something was trying to push through. As I tried adjusting the dials, the low, drawn-out hiss persisted. I felt almost alive with a presence that made me uneasy. Days later, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, sometimes catching a faint light flickering beyond the trees in the quiet woods. Earlier, during an encounter that still haunts me, a stranger had appeared. Standing in the wilderness, he seemed wildly out of place. His dark hair was slicked back, his expression flat but intensely focused. When he called out, "Hey," I stopped. After a brief cryptic exchange, he told me the things I'd seen weren't real, and that I should leave before nightfall and never return. He smiled, but it was a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he'd said in a low, steady voice that made arguments feel pointless. When I explained I was just hiking, he simply nodded and thanked me for my discretion before disappearing into the forest shadows. The whole experience didn't make sense, yet somehow it did. I never returned to that trail and rarely spoke about what happened, and I'm still trying to understand what occurred that night. I was driving a long-haul route through New Mexico, somewhere between Albuquerque and Gallup, when I stopped at a truck stop just off Interstate 40. It was early morning, around 4:30 a.m., that quiet time when the sky starts to lighten but darkness still lingers. The parking lot was mostly empty, with just a few scattered trucks and a closed convenience store. As I stepped out of my rig and stretched, I glanced up at the sky. It was clear, maybe a bit colder than usual for that time of year, and the stars were still visible. That's when I first noticed something unusual. A black sedan was parked at the edge of the lot where the pavement met the woods. It looked out of place, too pristine and polished for this area. Something about it felt deliberate, like it was waiting, though, for what I couldn't say. Inside the tower where I worked, I'd already experienced something strange. There was a man who didn't look like anyone you'd expect to see in those conditions. While most workers wore practical clothing, he was dressed in a crisp black suit and tie, with hair perfectly slicked back. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost luminescent in the dim light. His posture was different. He stood completely still like a statue, with one hand raised in a clear gesture telling me to stop. For a moment, I thought I might be imagining things. The fog was dense, the room dark, with static buzzing in every corner. But when I looked again, he remained unmoving, watching me intently. His eyes seemed fixed on me, though I couldn't make out their color against the faint glow of the control panel. My first instinct was to reach for the radio, but suddenly the static surged, cutting through my potential transmission with a harsh, overwhelming hiss. It felt like more than interference, more like a warning. I watched as he abruptly turned and stepped off the catwalk, disappearing into the mist. I sat frozen, listening to the lingering static in the tower's machinery. When the morning shift arrived, I described what happened, but no one believed me. They dismissed it as fatigue or a fog-induced hallucination. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. My phone became unpredictable. Calls wouldn't connect, texts would send blank, and the screen would occasionally flicker with static, even when powered off. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched whenever I was outside or driving home in the darkness. Something had changed, and I knew this was only the start of something much bigger. Right away I spotted something strange in the sky. It was a low, fast-moving light cutting across the horizon, moving far too quickly for any aircraft I'd seen before. I spend a lot of time watching the sky during these long drives, and I'm familiar with planes, helicopters, and satellites. But this was different. The vehicle was traveling low, just a few hundred feet off the ground, and incredibly fast, much faster than any small plane. What struck me most was the complete silence. No engine hum, no sound at all. It moved in a way that simply didn't make sense. As I approached, the surrounding pickup trucks and older vehicles caught my attention. I was about to ignore the strange light when two men in dark suits stepped out. They moved with a calm purpose, almost methodical, but not rushed. One of them looked directly at me and gave a small nod. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "You need to be careful what you say," one of them said in a low, serious voice. Some things are better left alone. Before I could respond, they got back into their car and drove off, leaving me standing in the swirling cold fog. After that encounter, the static on my radio became more pronounced. Broadcasts would cut in and out erratically. Sometimes, just before signing off, I'd hear faint whispers through the radio. Nothing I could clearly make out, but enough to make me pause. I kept thinking about that man outside the TV window, his movements, and the warning. Though I never saw him or the two men again, their presence lingered. Every time I climbed the tower, I felt watched, as if the fog itself was waiting for something. Eventually, the static faded and broadcast returned to normal. But the feeling never went away. Sometimes late at night, when the wind is just right and the fog rolls in thick, I swear I can hear that same hiss creeping back through the radio, soft and steady, like a warning from just beyond the trees, and a man in a crisp black suit stood out at the truck stop, nothing like the typical patrons. No hat, no boots, just a neat outfit and polished shoes. Clean-shaven and in his late 50s, something about his posture made me uneasy. I ordered coffee and tried to ignore him, but suddenly he was right beside me. "Quite a night for watching the skies," he said, his calm voice controlled and authoritative. I described what I'd seen, slow, fast, silent, unlike any plane. He nodded, as if this was familiar territory. "Most people don't notice," he explained. "They assume it's some advanced technology, but sometimes it's something else, entirely." Leaning in, he spoke like sharing a delicate secret. "Some sightings aren't meant to be explained. Not every observation leads somewhere safe." His smile wasn't comforting when I pushed for more details. "I'm here to help people understand when to speak up and when to stay quiet," he said. Before I could ask more, he handed me a business card. Blank, except for a phone number and the name Mr. Stard. "Gray, call if you have questions," he said, then glanced toward the exit. Late one spring afternoon, I was hiking alone in the San Gabriel Mountains north of Los Angeles. The day was warm but crisp, with clear skies and a few clouds near the horizon. I'd started around 3 p.m., planning to explore a trail between Eaton Canyon and Mount Wilson before sunset. The hike was peaceful, with few people on the trail. Most turned back early, but I ventured deeper, heading toward a ridge with a good valley view. Around 5:30, I stopped in a clearing, took a drink, and noticed something unusual to the east. At first, I thought it was a helicopter, but it wasn't moving like any aircraft I'd seen. A smooth, metallic oval hung silently above the treetops, maybe a few 100 feet high. No visible wings or rotors. The low sun caught it strangely, making it shimmer like oiled metal. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few pictures, zooming in as best I could. Then, without warning, it vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone, like a lamp switching off. I scanned the ridge where it had been, but found nothing. No aircraft, no drone, just empty sky. And I was hiking back from the trail, the day's events still spinning in my mind. Something extraordinary had happened, something I couldn't explain. As the sun started setting around 6:45, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, I found myself back at the parking lot. 2 men were waiting near my car. They looked completely out of place, dressed in crisp black suits with perfectly pressed white shirts and matching black ties. One was tall and lean with sharp features, the other shorter and stockier, wearing dark sunglasses despite the fading light. They didn't bother with introductions. The taller man cut straight to the point. "Did you take any photos today?" My phone sat on the passenger seat. I hesitated before admitting I'd captured a couple of strange images near the ridge. His eyes narrowed, though his face remained unchanged. "We need you to delete those photos for everyone's safety," he stated firmly. When I asked why, the shorter man interrupted bluntly, "No reason for you to know. It's best if you forget what you saw and don't share anything." My stomach tightened. I told them I wasn't comfortable just deleting evidence of what I'd witnessed. They exchanged a quick, knowing glance. The tall man leaned in, speaking softly but with unmistakable authority. "We're not asking. We're telling you to delete the photos and not talk about this." It felt like a scene from a bizarre movie. When I suggested this might be a joke, they didn't laugh. The shorter man pulled out a small black device, warning that they didn't want to escalate things. "You cooperate and nothing happens." I raised my hands, trying to explain I was just a hiker. After a moment of intense staring, the tall man nodded to his companion. They turned and walked away, leaving me more confused than ever. Earlier that day, I'd seen something unexplainable. A friend on the road had laughed it off, suggesting it was probably just a drone or military test. But I knew what I'd seen wasn't normal. A guy in a suit had even warned me at a truck stop to keep quiet, turning and walking away quickly. The whole experience didn't make sense. I haven't called the number he gave me. Sometimes, as that guy said, it's better not to tell anyone. But the image of that silent, fast flight still haunts me whenever I drive through those empty desert stretches. I hadn't planned on being there long that night. The gravel road leading to a small public fishing spot was quiet, especially on a weekday. No one comes around late, and I just wanted to unwind after work and maybe capture some star shots. The lake surface was perfectly still, mirroring the starry sky. I set up my camera and phone, hoping to get some long exposure images of the water and sky. About an hour in, something caught my eye. Faint lights flickering just above the tree line on the far side of the lake. These weren't typical plain lights. They were too scattered and irregular. At first, I thought it might be a campfire, but the colors kept shifting: red, green, pale blue, almost like LED party lights, but without any pattern. I zoomed in with my phone and started recording video. The lights moved strangely, floating just above the trees in a way that didn't make sense. It felt like a half-remembered dream, yet the photos on my phone were real. I checked the news for any unusual sightings, but found nothing: no missing persons, no accidents, no government statements. Later, 2 men in a dark sedan approached me. They were calm, confident, as if this was routine for them. They told me to delete the photos for everyone's safety. Their presence was eerily normal, like they were used to people seeing things they shouldn't. After they left, I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, hands shaking. Opening my phone, I looked at the blurry shots of a metallic shape against the sky. Part of me wanted to delete everything, yet another part refused to forget. The next day, I drove back to the trailhead, hoping to find some sign or clue. The parking lot was empty except for my car. No black, no suits, no sedan. I hiked a little way up the trail, but the ridge was quiet and normal. No lights, no metallic shapes. I told a few close friends about the men, but not the object. No one really believed me, and I didn't push it. I didn't want the photos online or anywhere else. Weeks later, when I'm alone, I still think about those 2 men and that strange encounter. The thing felt like a half-remembered dream, but the memory remained sharp. Sleep was impossible that night. The weather was clear but crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible if you stop moving. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt it was safer that way. Sometimes I wonder about what happened, especially during quiet moments outdoors. When I returned from the lake, the forest felt unusually silent. No nightbirds chirped, no distant highway sounds, just the crunch of my boots on pine needles. Earlier, I'd filmed something strange near the water. Lights that blinked and shifted, moving in a pattern too deliberate to be a random drone or boat show. At the parking lot, 2 men in black suits and dark sunglasses were waiting by my truck. They looked like they'd been expecting me. The taller one with thinning hair spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "Are you the one who took the videos near the lake?" I confirmed I was, wondering how they knew. My phone had been acting weird ever since I left the water. Glitching, flickering, apps crashing unexpectedly. The video itself was grainy but showed these unusual lights, uneven and shifting colors, moving in an odd way. The second man, with a squared jaw and impassive expression, stepped forward. "Step forward. There's a technical issue. We need to take your device and make some checks." When I hesitated and asked why, the first man explained that something on the device could potentially cause problems if left unchecked. "We're not asking," the tall man said, his gaze steady. "Just give us the phone." My heart raced, but I tried to remain calm. I didn't feel comfortable handing it over, but their presence suggested this wasn't really a request. 2 strangers dressed unusually were approaching me, demanding my phone after I recorded something odd. My instincts told me something wasn't right. They seemed out of place. When I refused to hand over my device, the man with the square jaw opened a small black case with electronic gadgets I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry," I said, backing away toward my truck. "I have to get going." The taller man's voice grew serious. "You don't understand. Sometimes things like this don't end well if mishandled." I ignored his warning and drove off. watching them stand motionless in my rearview mirror. During the drive home, my phone started acting strange. The screen flickered and then went completely black. I tried turning it on multiple times, but nothing worked. When I got home that night, I plugged it in, and now, every now and then when I'm out hiking or just looking up at the sky, I wonder if they're watching, making sure I'm keeping quiet, or if the thing I saw is still out there, hiding just beyond the ridge, waiting for the next person to notice. I'd been driving through northern Vermont with my wife Jess, slowly making our way out of the city toward a rented cabin near Lake Champlain. Our trip was meant to be simple and relaxing, just us, the woods, and maybe some hiking. The quiet was comfortable, broken only by the rhythmic hum of tires on wet asphalt. Days earlier, strange events had begun with my phone becoming unresponsive. Other electronics in the house started acting up too. The Wi-Fi router dropped signal, and lights dimmed briefly. Nothing major, but definitely odd. Then an unknown number called. A clipped voice said, "Mr. Harper, we're calling regarding your device," followed by silence. "You'll be contacted soon. Please cooperate." Then the line went dead. After that call, the glitches stopped. My phone powered on, but all the video files I had recorded that night were gone. Even older files had been wiped clean. The mysterious men never contacted me again. About 20 minutes before our turn-off, we passed a small rest area. A dark sedan caught my eye, parked oddly under a flickering orange lamppost, facing toward the forest at an unusual angle. "Hey, look at that car," I told Jess. "Doesn't seem right." She glanced over. "Yeah, that's weird. Should we pull in? Maybe someone needs help." As we slowed down, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, wearing a crisp dark suit, black tie, white shirt with neatly slicked back hair. His pale complexion revealed nothing. No anger, no friendliness, just a serious demeanor. He didn't wave or call out, just stood in the dim light, staring directly at us. The sky was a deep blue bordering on black, with just enough fading light to keep the horizon visible. Cold, damp air from an earlier rain left the road slick, and a low fog started creeping along the edges of the trees. Jess brought the car to almost a complete stop. "You okay?" she asked. "The whole incident still haunts me. Why those strange lights? Why were they so interested in a simple video from a quiet lake? It feels like something between reality and a bad dream that I can't shake. But I know what I saw." A mysterious encounter haunted us from the moment we met the man on the roadside. His low, steady voice delivered a stark warning. "Turn back before it's too late." Jess looked puzzled, and I was caught completely off guard. Before I could ask for more details, he took a step back and seemed to melt into the shadows, not by walking away, but as if the light around him simply dimmed until he vanished entirely. The rest of our drive felt tense and unsettling. Jess locked the car doors, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did he just disappear?" she whispered. We kept scanning the road and mirrors, half expecting to see the black sedan or the man's face watching from the woods. When we reached the cabin, everything felt different. Forest sounds seemed thicker, more watchful. Wind rustling through pines and birds settling for the night carried an unusual weight. That night, sleep eluded me as I thought about the man and his cryptic warning. Even my phone was dead, despite being fully charged before we left. The next morning, I returned to the rest area, hoping to find some trace of evidence. Only tire tracks leading toward the forest remained on the empty gravel spot. I took photos, though the morning light was weak and fog thick. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. Jess described a dream about walking down a road, hearing a voice telling her to stop, but no one was there. The feeling lingered with her all day. Over the next 2 days, odd incidents continued. My phone flickered with static and died randomly. Jess's watch stopped working despite being fully charged. The cabin's power flickered despite clear weather. We decided to leave a day early. Looking back, the entire experience feels like a half-remembered dream or a trick of light. Yet certain details remain vivid. The device glitches, Jess's dream, that warning voice urging us to turn back. I'm still unsure what we encountered or what it wanted, but something about that forest fundamentally changed how I perceive unexplained moments. Could you please share the original script or paragraph that you would like me to restructure?